Hi, everybody. This is Rob Galvin. Thanks for joining us today for this week's RhoMobile Suite Developer Talk. We have a series of developer talks coming up that are focused on our 4.0 release that is coming out soon. Last week, or maybe it was the week before, we had Adam Blum do a presentation overview on 4.0. If you missed that, please be sure to check that out on Launchpad. It is available for replay. Today, we have another topic which is related to an upcoming feature in 4.0, and that has to do with RhoConnect and source adapters. And we have Lars Burgess here to go over that information for you today. In the next couple of weeks, we have additional 4.0 topics as well. Next week, we will be talking about our new Visual Studio plugin, and Adam Blum will be demonstrating that. And then the following week, I will be giving a presentation on our mobile APIs, walking through some code examples on some new ways to access our APIs and some new features that you should get familiar with. So be sure to tune in to Launchpad, the RhoMobile Suite video section for registering for those upcoming sessions. All right, Lars, well, welcome. Thanks for joining us today. I think we see your screen, so the floor is now yours.
Thank you, Rob. So my name is Lars Burgess. I'm the Director of Server Engineering for the RhoMobile Product Suite. You can follow me on Twitter there at Lars Burgess. And as Rob mentioned, I'm going to today be talking about JavaScript source adapters in RhoConnect. So this talk is going to sort of assume that you're familiar with RhoConnect. Maybe you've written a source adapter or written an application using RhoConnect before. So JavaScript source adapters are a new feature of RhoConnect 4.0. And if you're familiar with RhoConnect, what we have currently in 3.4 is the ability to write source adapters using Ruby. And they're simple Ruby classes where you can interact with a backend system like a CRM system or ERP system. So in 4.0, we're adding the ability to write those same source adapters using JavaScript. And I'm going to touch on a couple of new features as well that are part of the new source adapter API in 4.0, where you can, in addition to writing source adapter code, you can also interact with how RhoConnect does routing for your application. So in JavaScript, we have the same source adapter API that you're used to. It's just instead of Ruby, it's going to be in JavaScript, and you can still access all of the same methods that you need to interact with your backend system. So if you need to access the user who is doing the synchronization, or if you need to interact with the Redis data store, all those APIs are available and will continue to be available as we support JavaScript. So before I touch a little bit on the architecture, JavaScript source adapters, they run on the Node.js platform. So we've chosen Node.js as the runtime for our JavaScript support. And the reason for that is pretty much it's the most ubiquitous JavaScript runtime for the server. So if you want to interact with different systems, find different third-party libraries like REST clients or database adapters or things like that, there's going to be a Node library available for you. And the trend now is that Node.js libraries are rapidly on pace to become on par with the Ruby ecosystem. There's thousands of Node libraries. They call them NPM, or Node Package Management Modules. And it's a great ecosystem to be a part of, and so you'll feel right at home if you've used it before writing JavaScript adapters. So the thing to remember about Node is that everything is asynchronous. As I walk through the code examples, and we're actually going to build a simple product source adapter, you'll see that the syntax is a little bit different. How the flow of your source adapter is built is a little bit different from Ruby, and that's just the nature of Node.js and the JavaScript environment, since everything is asynchronous and everything is based on kind of callbacks when your functions are executing. So here's a very simplified view of RhoConnect 3, how it how the process is set up to run source adapters. You just have a single Ruby process. In this case, it's run by the thin web server, and that thin process will manage executing your source adapter code, which is all in the same Ruby process. It'll interact with Redis, and it's just kind of a simple package as part of one process. And what we've done in 4.0 is we've decided to utilize a powerful, very powerful feature of Redis called PubSub. And what PubSub lets us do is it lets us do messaging between multiple processes. So in 4.0, we'll have a Node.js process, which contains your JavaScript source adapters, and we'll have a Ruby process, the same one that was in RhoConnect 3, which manages your Ruby source adapters. So you can mix and match if you want to. And the two processes will communicate with each other through Redis PubSub. And we found this to be a very efficient messaging system that utilizes an existing technology. So there's no a separate message queuing system or inter-process communication that needs to be installed. You just have Redis, and you have Node, and you have Ruby. So as I mentioned, the JavaScript source adapters are really just part of a Node.js process. And RhoConnect manages this process for you. You don't have to worry about starting it up yourself or managing the scripting of checking if it's up and things like that. RhoConnect will manage the whole process for you. So you'll start your application just like you normally would, and it will actually detect if there's JavaScript code available in your application. It'll start up a node process. So this is an example of a very simplified query method which will return a JavaScript hash that just has 2 records in it. And notice here this query method is being assigned to a function that has a response argument. Now this response argument is responsible for controlling how the JavaScript method returns back to Ruby. So if you want to exit this function, you'll actually have to send a response back on this object. And so we do that by calling response.send. So this way the result gets sent through PubSub back into Ruby, and it's handled through the RhoConnect Ruby algorithm for managing data synchronization. So this is an important note here that these node processes in a production environment could also be split off from your main RhoConnect application if you want to have them running on a separate server. They just have to be able to talk to the same Redis server for passing these messages back and forth. And as I mentioned, as it is part of the RhoConnect 4.0 beta, along with the rest of the RhoMobile suite, we are working on a complete API for JavaScript. So even things like stash result that you see here will be available. You can access all of your model functions. You can access the user, and you can also access the store API. So if you want to just store arbitrary data in Redis, you can still do that in JavaScript. And another new feature in 4.0 that Adam touched on is the ability to have controllers in your application. So RhoConnect 4.0 lets you not only manage the business logic of handling data with your backend system, you can also manage how the routing is done in your RhoConnect application. So if you wanted to, for example, add a desktop web interface to your RhoConnect application, you can easily do that now in RhoConnect 4 just by adding additional routes. Here's an example of the default login route for RhoConnect 4, where the device will come in with its username and password, and then you can authenticate and return a result. So this is one of the new features of 4.0 that we think is very powerful because it lets you have more transparency into how routing is done in RhoConnect, and you can customize the behavior of your RhoConnect sync process really as much as you like. All right, so let's go ahead and start a demo here. What I'm going to do now is walk through generating a RhoConnect application for JavaScript, and then we're going to build the standard product source adapter, which is going to pull down a list of products from a Rails application that we have running on Heroku, and we'll show how you would write essentially the same the same adapter in JavaScript that you've all seen in written in Ruby. So the first thing I'll do is I'm going to generate this application from the command line. We don't yet have JavaScript generation support in RhoStudio, so if you're using the latest RhoMobile Suite 4.0 beta, you'll have to use the command line to generate the application. But it's a very simple command line tool, so it's not too difficult to use. So first I'm going to do is just look at the help section here for generating an application. And you'll see now, since I have RhoConnect 4.0, I've got this additional option, this additional flag, --js. So when I generate my app, I'm going to use this flag, and it's going to generate a completely different set of files than it would be if I was generating it with Ruby. So let's go ahead and do that. --js. And you'll see there's an additional step now. When I generate the application with JavaScript, it actually goes and installs the npm dependencies. In this case, we have a single dependency, Redis, so our JavaScript code can interact with the Redis pub subserver. So let's take a look at what code was generated here. Here I've got my inventory server that I just generated, and you'll see that there's now a controllers directory, and inside the controllers directory there's a JavaScript or JS subdirectory, and it contains my application controller. So this controller, for those of you who are not familiar with 4.0 yet, this application controller replaces the old application class of 3.4. What we decided to do was, since everything now is, all the controllers are bubbled up so that you see them in your application, we removed this generic application class and put it into the controller that owns kind of login and authentication management. So here we've got two routes in this application controller. One is for login, and then one is for RhoConnect push login. You'll see there's some deprecated items here. You don't need to worry about those. Those are going to be removed when we do the 4.0 final. We just have them here for backwards compatibility while we're testing the betas. And so note here, when you see this this controller action, all of the parameters that come in from the client are tied to this request object. So you'll see this function takes a request object and a response object, and as part of the request object there's a params hash which contains your login and your password. So I can use this login and password to perform my authentication. And the rest of the files are pretty much the same that you would see from a normal RhoConnect application. The only additional file is this one called package.json. So this is part of Node's package management system, NPM, and this is how it determines what the dependencies are for your application. So this is the equivalent of a gem file for Ruby, which you still have because you're using the RhoConnect Ruby process to manage your JavaScript process. Okay, so now that we have a vanilla application, I want to go ahead and add my product model. So I'm going to do RhoConnect Source Product. And again, I have the same flag as I did for application. I pass it --js so that I generate JavaScript code instead of Ruby code. Now, first I have to cd into it. And so you'll notice now, because we're using 4.0, it's going to be generating not just a model, but also a controller. So now I can see I've got my model, which is basically the same thing as a source adapter from 3.4. And in addition to that, I have a controller. Now, by default, the controller doesn't have any routes in it. What we do is we hide the default sync routes in what we call this handler. And there's a sync handler, which is what installs all of the synchronization related routes automatically into your controller. So this is essentially this file, it's completely optional to modify. It's something you would really only modify if you wanted to add additional routes or if you wanted to customize the behavior of the synchronization routes that you're installing. So we're going to focus mostly on the model here. This is the product model as it's generated. And you can see it looks actually quite a bit similar to the Ruby version where you've got sort of a list of to-dos and the various methods here. We've got a login method, query, through and implement these methods. We've got first here the login method. In this case, I don't really have any logic to log in my users, so I'm just going to return true. The next is the query method. This is really usually the most important method that you need to implement. And what we're going to do is we're going to use the JavaScript library, HTTP, which comes with Node.js, to actually implement connecting to our backend system. So first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to set up some variables here. So I'm going to require the HTTP library, and then I'm going to set up the host name for what I connect to. And now that I'm in here, I'm going to set up my HTTP connections. So first, since I'm going to have to process the HTTP connection in chunks, I'm going to set up a string buffer for that, and then I'm going to make my request. And it's just going to be the normal products.json. And now what I need to do is I need to pass the result into a callback. And this is important because this processing of the HTTP request is totally asynchronous. I need to actually process the result inside of an anonymous function in order to handle, parsing the data and assigning it to my result hash. So what we're going to do is we're going to respond to the data event, and the data event will take a chunk. And every time we receive a chunk of data, we're going to update our buffer. So I'm just going to use this operator to do that. So now we've got this string buffer that's accumulating the data from the response. And finally, what we're going to do is we're going to write a handler for the end event. So when the end of the response is reached, it's going to call this function. And what we're going to do is iterate through our string buffer that we've accumulated here, and we're going to parse it with JSON first so that we get a proper JavaScript object, and now we can iterate through it. And sort of the simplest way is just using a for loop here, and I'm going to just set up my object for each item here in this array, and then I'm going to set up my result hash. So I'm going to assign the result hash using the product ID as the key. And of course, since I'm using RhoConnect, all of my IDs need to be in string format. And we have here the data structure, if you'll notice, just to cover real quick. You see that each of the items in this array has a nested product key, so I just have to reference that product key to actually get down to all of my attributes. So that's why I call item.product here. Okay, so we're done iterating through the array. Now what we're going to do is we're actually going to, I'm not going to put this send down here. I'm going to put it here at the end of my for loop. So now what's going to happen is when this for loop is done iterating over all the objects, it's going to return from this function back into RhoConnect, and this is going to send the result hash to Redis pub/sub. And then I just need to call my I need to call end on the HTTP request to actually execute the request. So this is what your basic query method will look like using the JavaScript library HTTP. There are other HTTP libraries for interacting with REST services that are a little bit shorter, but we found this is the most generic one, and it works cross-platform. So this will work on Windows or Mac or Linux or whatever. Some of the other REST libraries for Node.js don't work on Windows. So you want to be careful when you pick a library to work with your backend system that it will run properly on your machine.
Hey Lars, where would we find the syntax and documentation around the libraries that are included with, Node, or what we decided to package up with this?
That's a great question. So this is actually part of the standard Node standard library. So if I go to nodejs.org, they have an excellent documentation system for all their standard libraries. This is just the HTTP one I'm using. So you'll see here, HTTP request. And so this is essentially what I walk through and put into my source adapter.
Okay, so that list that you just showed before on that page, click back a couple of times. That's the list of, yeah, that one right there. No, yeah, I'm sorry. Go ahead. One more.
Yeah, this one here. This is
Yep.
this is the standard library for Node.js. All of the different high-level modules that are available.
Okay, so we're
It's
using a
got
standard package.
exactly, yeah. So this this source adapter has no external dependencies. This is just using straight Node.js standard libraries. And so you'll see the only library I actually need is the Redis library in my application.
Okay. And just to go back to your JavaScript for a second, the require function there, could you just talk about that for a minute? Where is that coming from?
Yeah, it's sort of analogous to Ruby's require. What it's doing is just loading this particular standard library or library that's on the node path into a variable. So it's a little bit different from Ruby in that you don't just require files or require libraries and not assign them to anything. Um, in Node, or more particularly in JavaScript, the convention is you assign it to a variable. And so now anytime I want to reference the functionality that's provided by this library, I have to use this HTTP variable. So this HTTP variable exposes the various methods like request and different functions that you can use.
Okay.
And so just for completeness, I'm not gonna walk through typing the rest of the methods because they're quite, as you can see, it's quite a bit of code. So I'll just go ahead and paste in. We've got a create method here. I will walk through a little bit how this create works because it's important for how the IDs are returned. But essentially what we do is we construct our post body here. In this case, I kind of expand it out into a variable and it's a JSON string. So again, everything that your methods will need to function comes in this response object where there's a parameter hash. In this case, I have a create object. So this will create the post body for my request to create a record. And then what I'm going to do now is since the HTTP library for Node doesn't have methods like put, post, patch, delete, I have to actually construct my HTTP requests in terms of what method I use, the path, and things like that. So I'm going to create an options hash, which defines the method as post. My content type is application JSON, and my path is products.json. So then I do everything else is the same. I just pass in my request. Instead of passing in a string for the get request, I'm going to pass in my options hash, which is going to define a post request. And then from there on, everything is pretty much the same. I process the response with a chunk, and I send my, when the data comes back from the response, I send the ID of that product. So this is the same thing in Ruby where I have to parse out the response to actually get at the product ID from the newly created record. And RhoConnect will use this new product ID to create a linkage between the temporary ID from the device and the actual ID that was, or the actual record that was created on the backend system. And then at the very end, I write this response or write this HTTP request, and then I send it. So this will actually execute the request and make a post request to the server. And so just so we have a complete example, I'll paste in my update and delete. Update is basically the same thing as create, with the exception that I don't parse any responses or anything. I still create my put request in this case, but then I create my update object and I send it to the server. And then the same thing for delete. And of course, this sample application will be available after the webinar here. I'll put it up on GitHub, and it's also, this sample adapter is what we have on our documentation page. So if you want to follow along later, you can see the same code there. So let's go ahead and run this. And I'm just going to run it the same way I would normally run a server. I just do RhoConnect start. And you'll see what's going to happen is RhoConnect's going to detect that I've got JavaScript running, or JavaScript code in my application. So you'll see that this extra message here started Node.js process, and it gives the process ID. So this is an important thing to check when you're developing applications in JavaScript. If you don't see this line, or if you see a line that says skipping JavaScript support, then you need to check your setup, make sure that you have your package.json, make sure that you have the necessary files to run the JavaScript. All right, so let's go ahead and run my, I have just a simple roads application that I built that has this product model. You've all seen this kind of before in the tutorials, so I won't walk through building this, but this application is just set up to connect to my, my local RhoConnect server. So let's go ahead and run that for iPhone. This will take a few seconds to compile.
Hey Lars, while this is compiling, just for those who are not familiar at all with Node.js, and I know there's a ton of information out there on the web, but any particular sites or concepts that would be good in terms of getting a primer on Node.js or the different things that are in Node.js that you should that are more closely related to what you would come across with a RhoConnect type of application. Any suggestions you have for that?
Yeah, well, of course, I mean, if you're new to JavaScript, I won't walk through. There's tons of tutorials and websites out there in terms of teaching JavaScript. I recommend Code Academy is a good one where you can just learn how to code JavaScript in the browser. In terms of documentation and tutorials and introductions to Node.js, their main website has a pretty good they have this kind of community page where you can go through and explore Node and just kind of see what it's all about. There's also this tutorial site called Node, I believe it's called Node Tuts. Yeah. This is a great resource that has a lot of videos for performing different operations in Node. So I highly recommend checking out this resource as well. Okay, so we've got our mobile application running. Let me just make it a little bit bigger. um, okay, so let's go ahead and start this up, and I'll have my RhoConnect server window ready to go. And I'll just go ahead and log in. Let's say I want to log in as Lars and secret as the password. And there you go. So you'll see what actually happened here is it's using the new RhoConnect 4.0 routes. So it's hitting my login controller action that we showed earlier, and it's going and executing my product source adapters. So it's pulling down all this information using the JavaScript source adapters that I just wrote. So I've got my different products here. I can go and I can add a new one. There's a new Galaxy S4. And I can synchronize that. And you'll see it goes and hits my create action or my create methods in my source adapter. And we can verify. I usually like to verify when I'm building the adapter in my backend system. Great, so now I've got my additional record that I just created. And so this is great. Everything's working. What would happen if something's not working? So what do I do if I've got some kind of error? Like let's say, for example, let's say, for example, I have a syntax error. Well, syntax error is going to be simple because when I try to start up my server, it's going to actually fail to load this code. So you'll see right away. Typically with JavaScript, because it's easy to detect syntax errors, you wouldn't have to worry too much about kind of runtime syntax errors. But let's say, for example, I want to print something out like in here. Before I return the result, I want to just say, okay, my method is done. So I'm going to use the console function object, which is a global object available in Node.js. And I'm going to do the error logging here. Now, we don't support standard out because standard out is managed by the Ruby process. So if you do want to log messages, you have to use the error function. It'll still show up in your console output, though. So what we do is we actually direct all the standard error and standard out for the node process to the same Ruby process standard out. So here I will just log a simple message. And I'm just going to go ahead and log out and log in as a different user so I can trigger that source adapter. And here you can see now I've got my, it's executed my source adapter and printed out my log message there. So that's how you would do sort of normal debugging and kind of tracing. We are working on in 4.0 a way to tie a step debugger into JavaScript. We don't currently have that feature available. So this would be the way that you would do your debugging today. So that's pretty much sums up the what I had for the demo here. So I think now we're ready for questions, and I just want to mention that we are in the 4.0 beta, so we definitely want to get your feedback. We need your help with testing this. We need your help with finding any bugs or additional feature suggestions that you may have. We want to make sure that this is going to be a productive and powerful environment for you to build your applications with JavaScript.
All
Thank you
right,
very much.
thanks. Yeah, thanks, Lars. Yeah, so if anybody has any questions, if you can please enter them now, and we'll get those queued up here. Lars, if you can just jump back to your code view for a second.
Sure.
Well, I guess actually before we get to this question, let me ask you just generally. I mean, obviously, if you're more familiar with JavaScript than Ruby, this is a great path for you, right? But what other sort of considerations or things that would may lean more towards, this option as opposed to Ruby? Any other factors that might come into play here?
Yeah, I mean, as you mentioned, if your development team is comfortable with JavaScript, if let's say you have a lot of front-end developers, or of course if you have developers who've worked on Node applications before, this would be a perfect fit. Um, but there are some applications where JavaScript would make more sense. I think if you're doing a lot of streaming, if you're working with a streaming API, or if you're working with kind of complex HTTP APIs, JavaScript is sometimes better at handling that than Ruby because you get the option for doing easy asynchronous handling of the data. Um, there's also a lot of libraries available in Node.js for handling streaming content and for handling things like XMPP and all that stuff. Another good application is actually page scraping. So if your backend system or if your business application involves any kind of HTML scraping, you can use the Node jQuery library, and you can easily pull down data from a website, an HTML page, and process it using jQuery, which is a great use case for Node.js.
Okay, sounds good. Somebody asked kind of a follow-on to that question about any differences in performance or performance hits when we go to JavaScript as opposed to Ruby.
Yeah, we are in the process now of doing our performance testing. So our goal is to make it as fast as Ruby, and then we'll continue to optimize it further. But that's sort of our first stake in the ground. Um, so there is a slight overhead of the fact that we are going through Redis. So this data is going to be sent through the Redis pub sub into the Ruby process. So there could be potentially overhead there. As I mentioned earlier, we do support the stash result API. So as you go through the documentation here, make sure to take a look at that. It could be useful um, for cases where you know that you're going to be building a large data set that could potentially slow down as you need to send it to Redis. So this function allows you to sort of iteratively stash the data through Redis into Redis um, without having to accumulate a large data structure. So I would recommend taking a look at that if you know that your backend system is going to be dealing with enormous data sets.
And this stash result API was available prior to this release, right?
Yeah, it's also available in Ruby.
Okay.
So we have the equivalent. Let me just bring it up here. We have the equivalent function in Ruby as well. So this would be how you would use it in Ruby, and then in JavaScript, it's a similar call. The typical way to use it is to call it inside of a loop. You check like if I'm on record, every other record in this case, or like every 100 records, I want to store them in Redis so that my data set doesn't become too big.
Okay. This question is kind of off topic, but so this is source adapters we're talking about. The other way of kind of synchronizing data is using our server plugins. Any changes in that area coming up for 4.0 or in the near future? Or is
We
that
do not
pretty?
have any additional features for plugins. So plugins, well, I guess I should mention there is a new feature in RhoConnect 4.0, which is I can run an application without having an application. I can run what we call RhoConnect in standalone mode. So let's say, for example, I'm sitting in my home directory. I don't have any RhoConnect application here. I can still start um, I can still start up a RhoConnect app. And so this is useful if you're developing a plugin. You don't have to create a vanilla application and you know run it with source code. I can just I can just run the application directly here. So this RhoConnect server could be used for plugin development.
Okay, and that's just for development purposes, obviously, right?
No, I mean you could do this on your production server as well. If you have RhoConnect installed on your Linux machines, you can start it up with just RhoConnect start. You don't need to have an application. So what this is essentially is doing under the hood is we have a built-in, like a sort of a minimalist RhoConnect app that's built into the this RhoConnect command here, and it just uses that application to start up. So it's still running an application. It's just not running an application with any source code that you see,
Okay, got it, got it, got it. Okay.
because the only purpose of this application is to expose the REST API that is consumed by the plugin.
All right. Let's see. Next question. So you mentioned before, we have this the pub sub mechanism now, right?
Mhm.
Which I think you mentioned there when you build your default application, there's already some Ruby gems that are included, and you have access to those from JavaScript still, or maybe I misunderstood, but maybe you can just cover that topic again.
So yeah, so the way that we do process communication for um, for Node.js and Ruby is we marshal everything through Redis. So we're not directly accessing any Ruby objects from Node and vice versa. We're not directly accessing any JavaScript objects from Ruby. Everything is getting marshaled and sent through Redis PubSub. And what Redis PubSub is essentially a queuing system or a messaging system, which lets us do atomic blocking calls for messages. So we can, for example, have in our Ruby process, we have a thread that waits for the Node process to return something. And likewise, in the Node process, we have functions that wait for messages to come into this Redis publish queue. And so it's a very efficient, very lightweight way to do message passing between processes that we found was very simple, and it utilized an existing technology that we already have. Since you already have a Redis server, you don't have to install anything to facilitate this. And we found it to be very efficient at handling large amounts of data as well. Sending megabytes or hundreds of megabytes of data through this publish channel is just as fast as storing that amount of data in Redis directly.
And where would we see some more documentation on how to utilize the pub sub syntax and all?
Well, you can use it directly if you want to. All of this stuff would be documented on the Redis site. We kind of hide that stuff away. Like you typically wouldn't be directly publishing your own messages on the Redis PubSub channels, but you're more than welcome to if you want to. And so there's the library that we use in the JavaScript side is just the standard Redis one. Let me see if I can find it. Um, yeah, so we use the Redis npm module. Um, so there you can see the different options that are available with this library, and it's available inside of your RhoConnect app to use. So if you want to directly store data using the Redis client, you can do that. Now we also have the uh, store API available in JavaScript, which is, let me just bring that up. So we have the store API here where you have get value, get data, put data. The same things that are available in Ruby, you can access them from JavaScript. So here's examples of how I would um, store or get the key hello. I can pull the value out, or if I want to put a value into Redis, I can do it using the store API. Now this is
Okay.
a very simplistic Redis interface. Um, so if you wanted to become more advanced and use all of the features of Redis, like to storing hashes using hset, or if you want to do your own pub sub, you can do that as well.
Okay,
And they've
but
got free.
typically people would just be using the APIs that RhoConnect provides.
Right, yeah. I would say, you'd only want to use the Redis connection directly if there's something missing. And please, if there is something missing, let us know. We'd like to know if there's additional use cases for directly storing data in Redis that would be useful.
Yeah, this so Bob actually just posted a message while you were talking. He says that they use Tibco for their enterprise bus technology. Do you know if it's possible to write to Redis PubSub from a Java application?
Yes, Redis pretty much has client libraries in every language. Um, so let's see if we look at the Java one, I think it's actually called Jedis. Yeah, so they have on their redis.io, they have this clients page. And then if you look through the list of clients, they have a little star next to one that's kind of officially sanctioned or recommended. Um, and so if you use Jedis, you can interact with Redis directly from JavaScript. So it's actually looks quite a bit like the JavaScript library.
All right, great. Let's see. I don't see any other questions in the queue. One other question that I had come in prior to the session was, oh, and actually this came in while you were talking. If you can go to your create method there, if you can
Sure.
just walk through that a little bit more. So, um, in this function here, when we're actually sending the request, I think that's the part where you lost me. We're actually doing the request and then doing the
Yeah, so
write after that.
that's kind of how the Node HTTP library works is that you construct this request object. So nothing is being executed against the server right now from in this block of code. To actually execute the request, you have to write the data over the socket using the write function. And then if you don't call end, what will happen is you're just essentially holding that socket to the server. And so what they say is you write it and then you call end to make the request close. And so
Okay.
that's what's going to trigger the this end event here, because when the server response comes in, it's going to handle these different events. So remember, this code's non-blocking. So when this function executes, it's going to go all the way through, and then these different events are going to fire as data is coming in from the response.
Okay.
And this is just a way to handle the way to handle the response is through processing the chunks as they're coming in. So that's why we have this string buffer to do that. As I mentioned, there are some other higher level Node.js REST libraries that kind of hide some of this from you. But I felt it was good to kind of show this is how you would construct it from scratch, so you get an understanding of all the different pieces. So all of the other Node libraries, like they actually have one called REST client, and they have some other REST related libraries. They they have to do all this underneath the hood. So
Okay. Sounds good. Yeah. So Bob was just responding to the Tipco comment before. So just to confirm, he's basically saying it sounds like they could use Tipco as their adapter, right? If based on what we were talking about before, does that sound right?
I'm not familiar with Tibco. Is that a JavaScript library or Java library? I mean.
Well, he's saying it's their bus technology, enterprise bus technology.
Okay.
Um,
I mean, yeah, you can interact with RhoConnect using Java. We have a RhoConnect Java library that we're also kind of promoting in 4.0. So if you go to this is in our documentation as well, but this library is if you have like a Spring MVC app, or if you just have a regular or Java app that's using some other technology, um, you can uh, you can use this library to interact with the RhoConnect server. So this is actually a plugin as well as just a generic library. So you can use it. You can use this RhoConnect Java package as both a plugin for your Spring app or just directly as a way to access the RhoConnect REST API. I'm not sure if that does that answer the question. Am I understanding the question
uh,
correctly?
it may, yeah. Bob's muted, but If there's, let's see, yeah, he thinks so. Okay, so I think
Okay.
you got it covered. Okay, cool.
Okay. And
Uh,
feel free if another thing I wanted to mention here, I kind of had a slide on it, but um, just to mention, we have this 4.0 beta site for posting feedback and stuff. We definitely want your feedback and your questions to be answered. So if there's anything that we missed during this talk, please feel free to go here and ask questions here. We'll be on top of it.
all right, sounds good. I don't see any other questions. Just checking my list here. I don't have any other questions. Just give it another second here. Yeah, so great. Thanks everybody for joining Laura's great presentation as usual.
Thank
Uh,
you.
so just to remind everybody again, stay tuned for additional dev talks on 4.0. We have the beta up there. Please download it and post your questions up on the developer community. Next week we'll be doing the Visual Studio plugin, followed by some API walkthroughs. So I think that concludes the session for today. Unless anybody has any other questions. Nope. One more comes in last minute. Can beta
Okay.
run side by side? Can the beta run side by side? So, um, so Lars, you can maybe talk about the RhoConnect piece if you had different versions of RhoConnect.
Yes. So in RhoConnect, you can have RhoConnect is distributed as a gem. So I could have multiple RhoConnect gems, and the way that you switch between them, if you want to have different applications use different RhoConnect gems, is just using this gem file. So let's say, for example, if I just do gem install RhoConnect right now, it's going to give me the latest stable version of RhoConnect, which is 3.4.4. And I could actually use that. I could generate an application with that version, and then I can use that as well. So this is how we manage the uh, the versioning is using the gem files. So
Yeah, and similarly
and
with
on the road side,
yeah,
okay.
go ahead, Rhodes. Lars.
I was just say on the roads side, you can specify the SDK path. If you want to have different applications use different version of roads or row elements, you can do that using this SDK directive.
Yes, I think today we just distribute the full package for the beta. So what you could do is just download the beta, and then if you want to build against an older version, because that is just an updated, Eclipse Rose Studio, right?
Mhm.
Just change the path to the previous gem, the
Right.
2.2 gem. I forget the version number, but same type of concept.
Yeah, and for roads, since it's open source, you can also build from source code. So if you want to clone the repository, you can build directly from the master branch or from other branches. And some people like doing that if they're, let's say, they want to add a feature to roads, for example, or they want to fix a bug or something. You can build it that way.
All right. Okay. I think that covers it. Thanks again, Lars. Thanks everybody else for joining today, and we will see everybody next time. Thanks.
Thank you.